No, in a moment, we'll be going to all the big numbers, but let me introduce all our guests first. Joining me now on the show is India Today's editorial director, Raj Chengappa, is also with us. Yashwant Deshmukh, the cephalogist of CSDS. Remember, they've put together this poll. Rahul Verma, fellow at the Center for Policy Research. Syed Zafar Islam, Rajya Sabha MP and National Spokesperson BJP. Vibhakar Shastri, Spokesperson Congress. Raghav Chadha, Aam Aadmi Party's MLA and their person in charge in Punjab and their national spokesperson. So all bases covered at the start of this show. But first, of course, let me take you to the first big number that I'm taking you to. The first big question that we've asked in the Mood of the Nation poll. Remember, we told you we'll give you a sense of what's happening in the states. So one of the things is the performance of chief ministers in these states. Take a look at what our poll says when it comes to chief ministerial performance. We start with the big state of Uttar Pradesh. What is the level of satisfaction when it comes to the performance of the UP government? 49% say they are satisfied. For Yogi Adityanath, Chief Minister, remember, somewhat satisfied, 17%. Dissatisfied is 34%. So that's the first big number. Yogi Adityanath just below that 50% mark on total satisfaction levels. Let's turn to the next state. We turn to Punjab, where the performance of Punjab Chief Minister, 33% satisfied with Charanjit Singh Channi, taken over just a couple of months ago. Somewhat satisfied, 30%. And not satisfied is 37%. So Mr. Channi still struggling to establish himself fully in Punjab. Let's turn to the next state. We turn to the state of Uttarakhand. There you have Pushkar Dhami, 41% are satisfied with the performance of the chief minister. Somewhat satisfied is 26%. Dissatisfied is 34%. So no chief minister so far crossing that 50% mark in satisfaction. The fourth state that we turn to is the state of Goa, where with Pramod Sawant, satisfaction level is just 27%. Somewhat satisfied, 39%. So an average rating there coming for the chief minister. Dissatisfied is 34%. Finally, Manipur, and look at there, where we look at Nipendra Singh, 39% are satisfied with the chief minister. Somewhat satisfied is 28%, and dissatisfied or unsatisfied is 33%. That's the first big question that we want. Yashwant, give us a sense. You've extrapolated from the national poll into these state numbers. What is the big picture, according to you, that's emerging?
Well, obviously, Rajdeep, that the sentiment of anti-incumbency is pretty much in, and it has been working very strongly against the sitting MLAs as well. But yes, each and every state has a different story to tell. You know, on the face of it, it looks like Chief Minister Yogi of Uttar Pradesh has been carrying maximum satisfaction among his own set of supporters. But remind you that he also carries the maximum number of people who are dissatisfied as well, if you look at the otherwise. So probably because he is a polarizing figure, that he is loved and hated, I mean, in a very strong terms, probably he is getting those kind of numbers. But otherwise, Channi, I would say, has been a very good wildcard for the Congress, because if you will compare the numbers of Channi with Amrinder Singh, you will see that he has done a lot of damage control as far as the Congress leadership is concerned. The problem is that Mr. Channi's leadership is always questioned by more than the opposition rather than his own party mates, and that is what is clear danger or challenge for Mr. Channi. Right now, he is grappling with his own party more than what he is grappling with his opposition right now.
The first word that was used there by Yashwant was anti-incumbency. You know, there's a sense that no chief minister is getting 60% or more. There is no overwhelming satisfaction with any chief minister. Yogi Adityanath fares a bit better than the others. Is that a sense that we are at the end of a 5-year term of all these governments? So a level of anti-incumbency seems to have set in almost all the states.
Absolutely, Rajdeep. And if you look, we didn't just look at these 5 chief ministers. We also looked at all the other chief ministers. And if you see the, and if it's being projected later on this, there is a whole lot of other chief ministers, including Naveen Patnaik, who are scoring far above 40, 43, 45, going right up to 70%. And in those places, they somehow seem to have convinced their electorate that whatever work that they've done is paying off. And I think the question to ask in this and to look at is, have the chief ministers, is this a reflection? I know this is, we put the caveat, right? This is a national poll. It's unfair to just look at this particular figure. But the question can be asked, has the state chief minister delivered sufficiently? And as if Yashwant is saying, there's so much of negative vote, he better watch out.
You know, Rahul Verma, before Rahul Kanwal takes over with the politician, just a quick word from you. State elections are often seen as a referendum on the performance of chief ministers because elections are getting presidential. Should these numbers worry all these 5 chief ministers, given that no one is crossing certainly the 60% mark, all in fact below 50%?
I wouldn't say so. I think if the net satisfaction rating, which is basically satisfied minus dissatisfied, is in the positive direction, I think after 5-year term, chief ministers should be okay with that. Of course, it would be ideal to have a higher satisfaction rating going beyond 50 and 60%, but given the level of incumbency, as Yashwantji mentioned, that's, I think, fine. I think what's happening among the 5 chief ministers you actually mentioned, basically there is a division, right? Yogi Adityanath and Manipur CM Ibobi Singh is basically around 40 or above 40.
Nipender Singh,
especially Channi in Punjab, Pradeep Sawant in Goa, and Dhami in Uttarakhand. All these 3 chief ministers are basically were appointed in last 6 months to 1 year, right? So there is also that these are newcomers, didn't get enough time to do what they wanted to do. And perhaps in the anti-incumbency sentiment, political instability, at least at the chief minister level, is also being reflected in those numbers. At least Adityanath and Singh basically got all 5 years to govern.
Okay, so N. Biren Singh in Manipur and Adityanath are 5-year chief ministers. Remember, Adityanath, in that sense, net positive is higher than the other chief ministers. Rahul, your first reaction, Rahul Kanwal.
Let's take our viewers through the Prime Minister's performance in the Mood of the Nation opinion poll in these 5 states. We look at his national performance later, but let's take a look at how Uttar Pradesh is ranking the performance of Prime Minister Modi. And here, if we combine good and outstanding, Prime Minister Modi gets a ranking of 75%, people saying his work has been satisfactory. Average is only 9%, poor is 16%, which essentially means in Uttar Pradesh, the Prime Minister's connect with the people of the state still seems to be extremely strong. The moment you cut away from Uttar Pradesh and you come to Punjab, and you'll notice the numbers in Punjab in data set after data set, there is a big divergence. While in Uttar Pradesh, people love Prime Minister Modi, it's not the case in Punjab, where on account of various factors and most prominently the farmer protest, which has raged through the state over the last several months, the Prime Minister's popularity is much lower than it is anywhere in northern India. In Punjab, only 37% of the respondents feel the Prime Minister's performance is either good or excellent, which is about half of his popularity in Uttar Pradesh, where it was 75%. Average is 16%, and those who think the Prime Minister is not doing a good job stand at 44%. So Punjab, as I said, starkly different from the picture in neighboring Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan. No matter where you look, Punjab is that one island which Prime Minister Modi, despite his professed love for Sikhs and for Punjabis, hasn't been able to capture the imagination of. After this, let's come to Uttarakhand. And if you look at the performance of the Prime Minister here, it's lesser than it is in Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh was 75, Uttarakhand is only 59, but it's 6 out of 10 thinking that he's done a good or excellent job, which is a fair number for the Prime Minister to get. 16% think he's been average, 20% think the Prime Minister has been poor in the hill state of Uttarakhand. And we're looking at the poll-bound states first because that's where the maximum electoral consequence resides. Because you've got polls which will conclude on the 10th of March, and that's where the maximum amount of excitement is as well. From there, let's now cut across to the coastal state of Goa, where 67% think the Prime Minister has done a good or excellent job, 13% think he's been average, and 20% think he's been poor. Remember, in 4 out of the 5 states where elections are being held, it's the BJP which is currently in government, and therefore it is for them to try and beat anti-incumbency and come back to power if they can. Let's now finally cut across to Manipur, where the numbers are just lesser than Uttar Pradesh. 73% think the Prime Minister has done a good or excellent job. In fact, look out for Northeast numbers through this program, because you'll see, despite the BJP having done very well in 2019, if elections were to be held in the northeastern states now, this Mood of the Nation poll is suggesting that their tally could actually go up. Average in Manipur is only 8% and poor 18%. I want to go across to Syed Zafar Islam on this big divergence between Uttar Pradesh and Punjab. 75% of the respondents in Uttar Pradesh think the Prime Minister has done a good or excellent job, which is very useful for the BJP ahead of elections in this big state. But the moment you cut across to Punjab, and no matter what the BJP says about the Prime Minister liking Sikhs, liking Punjabis, his rating crashes to about half of his popularity in Uttar Pradesh. Zafar Islam.
Thank you, Rahul. Let me first respond to the first question of the popularity or the satisfaction level of chief ministers, each chief minister. If you just count the population, add the population of 4 states and deduct by the population of Uttar Pradesh, then you will realize that there are many such states will submerge in Uttar Pradesh. So, because the population of Uttar Pradesh is 24 crore, while the population of these states put together will be not even exceeding 6-7 crores. So that suggests that the popularity of 49% or a satisfaction level of 49% of the Honorable Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh is huge, because he has been able to satisfy, despite a population of 24 crore, he has the satisfaction level of 49% plus. More or less satisfied is 17-18%. Put together is like more than 60% people are satisfied compared to what other numbers you have indicated. Away from that, you were talking about the Prime Minister and his popularity or acceptance level or level of satisfaction of his work in various states, Punjab versus Uttar Pradesh. Trust me, since it has been ruled by some other political parties, many of the schemes have not been implemented on the ground of welfare scheme, which has been meant for the poor and the marginalized section of the society, which has not been implemented the way we have been able to implement in various states ruled by Bharatiya Janata Party. And also the numbers or the sample survey which has been done was during the agitation by the farmers. So I'm sure that they must have echoed their sentiments, and that is something away from the popularity. Probably they must have sounded.
But it's interesting. It's interesting that you're saying that in the one state where the opposition is ruling, out of the 5, the Prime Minister's popularity doesn't match that of where BJP states are ruling. In a way, this perhaps reflects what the BJP would like to suggest, that where they have chief ministers, it's a double engine ki sarkar. But Vibhakar Shastri, there's good and bad news for the opposition and the Congress. There seems to be a measure of anti-incumbency certainly creeping in most of the states, but the Prime Minister's popularity by and large, except for Punjab, remains high. So therefore, in an election of this kind, state election, the opposition will have to deal with the possibility that the Modi Sarkar at the center, their popularity is much higher than the state governments. How do you see these poll findings?
Good evening, Rajdeep, and good evening to all my fellow panelists. Rajdeep, let us concentrate on the 5 poll-bound states, and rather than what image the Prime Minister is having all over the country. Let me tell you, as far as UP and Punjab, because we've been discussing that a lot, are concerned, UP, the Honorable Prime Minister said this fight is between 80-20. So I think the ratio is already half there, because it's just 40-odd% showing that they prefer the Chief Minister, and the rest are saying they might prefer, and the rest are saying they don't. So I don't think it's a 80-20 fight. The Chief Minister is well below that mark. So I think the fight there is pretty even between all the 3 parties concerned. whether it's the BJP or the Samajwadi Party, and of course the Congress, with our new narrative as far as the woman empowerment is concerned. I think on the ground it's hitting it very well, and we are doing pretty well. And as far as Punjab is concerned, the Honorable Chief Minister, Mr. Channi, has done a reasonably good job. And as we have been telling in different TV debates also, that we want the government and the party to run in hand, and that's what is happening. So people debate about Sidhu coming in, Mr. Sidhu coming in and talking about the Honorable Chief Minister, criticizing him. That's not the way, that's not how we look at it. वो प्रदेश के वो पार्टी के अध्यक्ष हैं, ये चीफ मिनिस्टर हैं. So
that's maybe not how you're looking at it.
As far as Uttarakhand is concerned.
No, Mr. Vibhakar Shastri, that's not how you may be looking at it.
I think his performance.
But the fact is that Mr. Channi and Mr. Sidhu seem to be at cross ends. But let's keep our focus on the big picture for a moment. Raghav Chadda, the big picture that is clearly emerging is that chief ministers are more vulnerable at the moment possibly, and state governments than the Prime Minister himself. Am I to understand that even for the Aam Aadmi Party in Punjab, the primary target therefore is to target the state government? This is not an election about Mr. Modi's performance, it is going to be an election about each chief minister's performance.
Yes, Mr. Sardesai, this is an election to elect the MLAs and not the MPs, and thereby elect the chief minister of a particular state and not the prime minister of the country. And therefore, the numbers that hold a lot of relevance today are the performance ratings of respective chief ministers. Now, I was paying a lot of attention to the numbers that you had put out, particularly for the state of Punjab, since I'm looking after the state of Punjab for my political party. I'm doing this conversation with you, this debate with you, sitting in Punjab. And I can tell you that as far as the satisfaction rating of Charanjit Singh Channi goes, it is abysmally low. In fact, it is lower than the Prime Minister's approval rating in Punjab. So if the figures are correct, Channi Saab's satisfactory rating is 33%, and the Prime Minister's satisfactory rating is 37%. The Prime Minister of India, who is a hated politician, most unpopular in the state of Punjab, somehow still, in terms of his performance, is above Charanjit Singh Channi, which is a cause of worry and concern and should be for the Congress party. That's point number one. Point number two, it would be incorrect and unfair to just look at the performance rating of Charanjit Singh Channi over the last 111 days. He has been the chief minister for roughly 111 days. And prior to him, for almost 1700 days, we had Captain Amrinder as the chief minister. So we should look at the satisfactory rating of Captain Saab for those 1,700 days and the satisfactory rating of Channi Saab for 111 days and do a prorata and then arrive at a overall Congress satisfaction rate, and that would give you the right picture. And the picture would be that literally every single Punjabi is of the view that this Congress government has perhaps been the most nikammi government that the people of Punjab have ever seen. Captain Saab didn't step out of his mahal over the last 4.5 years.
You have cherry-picked very intelligently the numbers that give you a sense of rising anti-incumbency, but Yashwant Deshmukh, just a minute. In these two sets of graphics that we provided, would it be right, Yashwant, to say that the Prime Minister's popularity is what's pulling up the BJP governments? The chief ministers don't remain, in most instances, even half as popular as the Prime Minister, except Yogi Adityanath. In all the other states, the chief minister's popularity is mostly well below that of the Prime Minister. And therefore, that's the problem for the BJP in a state election where the chief minister will be the focus.
Absolutely, Rajdeep. And actually, if you compare the overall things, a broad trend, you will realize that Prime Minister's satisfaction rating are almost 30% more approximately than his chief ministers. And NDA central government's satisfaction rating is almost like 20% more than their state government. So obviously, in the pecking order, you can very well say that, in terms of the leadership evaluation for the BJP or the NDA, the central leadership is an asset and their state leadership is clearly a liability. While in the case of Congress or the UPA, probably, I don't want to use the harsh word, but probably it's the other way around, because the satisfaction ratings of majority of the Congress state leaders in their respective states, right now you can only see Chennai, but if you look into the other numbers, for example, the numbers that Harish Rawat is polling in our state tracker that we are doing for ABP, his numbers are way ahead than the Congress central leadership. And that probably is true in case of Bhupesh Baghel in Chhattisgarh or any other Congress ruled state. So it's a kind of a weird combination. Some may say that, BJP is likely to poll approximately 10 to 15 points less than what they poll in Lok Sabha whenever they go to an assembly. I like to put the same fact in the other way around. Whenever there is a Lok Sabha election voting intention, in our Trevor, we have always figured out 10 to 15% of what you can say as a Modi dividend for the BJP in that way. Otherwise, it is as far as their state leadership is concerned, I am not mincing my words. Majority of the state leaderships of the BJP, barring the state of Assam, has been more of a liability than an asset.
Very interesting, because clearly we've seen this pattern come post 2019 Lok Sabha, where the BJP's vote share seems to decline in state elections compared to Lok Sabha. And let's turn therefore to the performance of the NDA and how that is seen in these 5 states. In Uttar Pradesh, 69% said that they were satisfied with the performance of the NDA. That's the central government. Neither satisfied nor unsatisfied was 8%, unsatisfied was 22%. So again, NDA performs better than the state government in UP. In Punjab, satisfaction levels 34% with the NDA, 13% neither satisfied nor unsatisfied, and here the dissatisfaction level very high with the NDA also, 51%. So Punjab remains the outlier. Both at the state and central level, the NDA and the BJP are taking a hit in Punjab. Not surprising given the farmer unrest and other issues in that state. Uttarakhand, 57% satisfied with the performance of the NDA. Neither satisfied nor unsatisfied, 18%, 19% unsatisfied. Goa, 50% satisfied. Remember, it was much lower for the state government. Neither satisfied nor unsatisfied, 21%, 29% unsatisfied. Manipur, 66% high satisfaction level with the NDA. Neither satisfied nor unsatisfied, 8%, 25% unsatisfied. Let me get you in, Raj, on this, because there seems to be this divergence that when you look at the state government's performance, the voters are not half as enthused as they look at the center. It's almost as if there's a complete disjunction between a BJP government in a state, as Yashwant was pointing out, and the center, and the reverse is the case with the Congress.
I think several messages are coming through in this analysis. One is that if Mr. Modi is standing for the Lok Sabha, clearly even in the state that may not vote for the BJP, they might vote for Mr. Modi. That's the sort of sense you get. Second is, I think Yashwant was talking about the Modi dividend that's there. Would this kind of popularity that Mr. Modi has in the BJP states, the so-called double engine states, translate into votes in the coming elections? From what we have seen in the past couple of elections since 2017, that has been a diminishing return. If you look at some of the major states that went to polls, say after 2017, whether it's Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, West Bengal, down south, Tamil Nadu, all these states, the Modi factor was not a major player in that sense, though he was highly popular. But when it came to the states, voting for the state chief ministers or state government, that might have had a certain percentage, but not enough to give the BJP the victory they wanted.
Rahul Verma, are you surprised with that? Or does this happen cephalogically, that the voter is looking at the state and the center very, very differently? We've seen it post 2019 in particular, Jharkhand, Haryana, Bihar, all these states, BJP doing much worse in a state election compared to the center. And Yashwant seems to point out, with the Congress, it's reverse. They seem to, voters look at the state leadership of the Congress more favorably than their central leadership.
Rajdeep, while I agree with the intent of that statement, I don't think there is anything unique about this phenomena. It always happened in the Indian politics. Think about the period of 60s and 70s and 80s. Congress used to win national governments and form governments at the national level, but in states it was always seen competition. So it's not as if something unique is happening at the moment. Yes, Prime Minister Modi remains one of the biggest vote aggregators in the recent time, and BJP gets some advantage of it during national elections and even in state elections. So yes, there is a gap between national and state election in BJP's performance, but It's not just because of Prime Minister contesting in national election, he's on the ticket, but not in the state election. Factors change, right? Like issues become different. Caste alignments basically come to much more fore during state election. Two level of elections are always going to be different. And let me, if I just have to point data, in West Bengal in 2019, BJP got 37% votes, same number of votes it got in assembly election. And look for any state, Haryana or Uttarakhand or Maharashtra, yes, there is a gap of 10 to 15%. But can you at 10 or 15% say that voters in India look at national and state elections very differently? Even in Haryana, BJP, which was a minor party before 2014, is now running its second consecutive government. So it's not as if things are happening completely different in national or state elections.
Before I go back to you, Rahul Kanwal, very quickly, Syed Zafar Islam, should that worry you?
Okay.
Because we've seen that states where the BJP sweeps Lok Sabha, you are finding it more and more difficult, particularly when you are in power, to face anti-incumbency with state governments. Your state leaderships are not half as effective as the Prime Minister.
Well, if you just realize in free India, the most popular leader is the Honorable Prime Minister, because the kind of popularity he is enjoying, no one has ever enjoyed in free India. So obviously anybody, whether it's a state chief minister of BJP ruled state or for that matter any other state chief minister, the popularity rating will definitely see very different numbers, because he is one of the most popular.
No, but are you worried? Are you worried with 4 of the 5 states going to the polls ruled by the BJP? Are you worried about anti-incumbency facing your chief ministers, particularly outside Uttar Pradesh?
Coming back to that, we use every resources available with the party, and the Honorable Prime Minister happens to be one of the very prominent resource. He is the tallest leader in the party, and he is as he rightly, Mr. Verma said, that he is the one who aggregates the votes as well. So definitely we will be using as extensively as we can, and it has always benefited the party. And in the upcoming election in the 5 states, it is going to make the difference as well. And we are
Rahul, you want to take over?
We are going to
I take your point. Let me go to Rahul Kanwal. Rahul, you want to take over because, the sense of this whole double engine idea. Do you get a sense, Rahul, that that is under strain?
What we're going to do now is give our viewers a sense of what might happen in these big poll-bound states if elections were held today. And before I take you through the numbers, I want to build this important caveat that these are Lok Sabha projections. They've been done at a time when there's an assembly election happening, but these are not opinion polls for these poll-bound states. This is what might happen in these states if elections were held today for the Lok Sabha. So with that caveat clearly stated, let me take you through what might happen in that big state of Uttar Pradesh, about which there is so much interest if Lok Sabha elections were to be held today. The Mood of the Nation opinion poll done by C Voter for India Today group suggests that the NDA, that's the BJP and its smaller allies in the state of Uttar Pradesh, could back 67 out of the 80 seats. Remember, if you look at the 2019 data, the BJP plus had 64 seats. So that's 3 more than they would have got in 2019, and that is for Uttar Pradesh. Others at 12, the UPA at 1. So we've kept the SP and the Congress separate. So SP, BSP together is just 12, and Yashwant can then try and break that up for us when we go to him later. But essentially, the BJP plus in Uttar Pradesh at 67 seats. From there, let's go to Punjab. Now, this is interesting because it gives you some insights of how people are thinking, but it's not in the context of an assembly election. It's in the context of a Lok Sabha election. So in Punjab, on the 13 Lok Sabha seats, if elections were held today, the Mood of the Nation projection is that the UPA could bag 8 seats. That's the Congress with 8 seats. The others are at 5, which includes the Aam Aadmi Party and whatever the Akalis and the BJP would have got. So, sorry, the BJP is at 0. So, AAP and the Akalis are at 5, the Congress at 8, NDA along with Amrinder Singh at 0 in Punjab for Lok Sabha elections. From there, let's go to the hill state of Uttarakhand, where in the 2019 elections, as was the case before that in 2014, where the BJP bagged all the hill state seats. The same is likely to happen if elections are held right now. 5-0 in favor of the BJP in Uttarakhand. And the last data that we have is for Goa. And here, once again, the NDA likely to bag both the seats that are on offer. In the 2019 elections, they had one they'd lost, but this time they're likely to bag both. So Yashwant, could you explain some of these other numbers in Uttar Pradesh? I would assume that a lot of the others are actually the SP, and do you have a breakup for that, and can you share that? And the fact that the BJP doesn't even open its account in Punjab, and how the Congress seems to be still picking up 8 seats despite the fact that there is a fair amount of anti-incumbency in the state against the state government.
Rahul, first I will start with Uttar Pradesh because the 12 figure looks at the others. Actually, 10 are Samajwadi Party and only 2 to the Bahujan Samaj Party. We are literally looking at some sort of a meltdown right now in numbers for the BSP in the tracker, and that is self-explanatory. In Punjab, the others 5 actually are Aam Aadmi Party and only 1 lead for the Shiromani Akali Dal as far as the Lok Sabha trend is concerned. However, I must say that, in terms of vote share, it is only a gap of 2% as far as the Lok Sabha voting intention is concerned between Aam Aadmi Party and the Congress. And that is pretty evident because, Rahul, you remember in Delhi also, Aam Aadmi Party polled almost like 50% in assembly election, that crashed down to 18%, and then again they polled up to 53% in Delhi. So somehow still people are, when they look at the national level, there is a considerable number even in Punjab, because in our, as I said, in our other trackers, that the state trackers that we are running, we are consistently finding Aam Aadmi Party has a 5% lead over the Congress as far as the voting intention of the state is concerned. That's a tracker that we run for the ABP. But here at the Lok Sabha level, there is a slight 2% edge to the Congress. But largely speaking, Rahul, it seems that that Congress, as far as its own internal work is considered, they are somehow losing ground or losing the momentum even in the states where they should be getting by default gain. For a state like Uttarakhand, for example, BJP changing 3 chief ministers in 6 months. I mean, what kind of confidence level do you think any party would deal with as far as elections are concerned? But still you are finding BJP comfortably ahead in spite and despite of the fact that time against multiple surveys have shown that Harish Rawat happens to be the leading most popular guy in Uttarakhand. But still Congress is unable to actually even openly tell that he is the chief ministerial candidate.
Let me take that point. Let's look at that, because we also asked, rate the Congress's role as the main opposition within these 5 states. How do you see the Congress at the center, its role in taking on the Modi government? In Uttar Pradesh, 31% said good, 16% said average, and 50% said poor when we asked them to rate the Congress's role. In Punjab, 36% said good, 10% said average, and 47% said poor. In Uttarakhand, 25% said good, 13% said average, and 58% said poor. In Goa, it was 30% good, 40% average, 30% poor. So Goa is the one state where the Congress's performance 30 plus 40 seems a little better than the other states. Manipur, 41% said good, 12% said average, 45% said poor. But if you look at it across these states, barring Goa, the Congress's performance is by and large seen as poor in many of these states. So Vibhakar Shastri, BJP clearly vulnerable at the state level, especially in states which they are losing. The Congress's ability to exploit that, which Yashwant said, is questionable. I mean, that is really, you don't seem to aggressively want to project Harish Rawat in Uttarakhand, even though our numbers for him seem to suggest that he would do rather well as the chief ministerial candidate. Is there a sense that the Congress, unlike the BJP here, your national leadership needs to push up your state leadership rather than the other way around? Your state leaders are doing better than your national leaders.
No, Rajdeep, Congress, we have always been in a believe in collective leadership. as far as different states are concerned. And Mr. Harish Rawatji is the campaign committee chairman. And of course, there is a PCC president, and the elected MLAs would decide who the chief minister would be, who the CLP leader would be. So I don't think that, it's been a tradition with the Congress announcing chief minister's candidate names before. I don't think even BJP, except for Mr. Yogi Adityanath, where they're forced to do this because of the 80-20 formula they want to work on, Hindu versus the Muslim. Otherwise, I don't think even BJP has announced any candidate in their ruling states.
No, but
let's not go there.
Let me be more direct. Do you believe your central leadership is a drag at times on state governments, on potential state governments that the Congress can have? That the best route really for the Congress is empower your chief ministers, project them strongly, and they may be more successful.
No, see, as far as our governments are concerned, whether it's Rajasthan, whether it's Chhattisgarh, whether it's Punjab, everywhere the chief minister is doing whatever they're supposed to do. They have a manifesto before the elections, and they follow that manifesto. Whatever is committed by the party, they follow to the T. So, the central leadership does not interfere in the day-to-day working. So, I don't think there's a conflict of interest there. And central leadership works on a different, as far as the Lok Sabha elections are concerned, or even the Vidhan Sabha elections are concerned. So it's a different, I don't think there's any conflict there.
One of the issues, of course, that we look at in depth in the mood of the nation is the economy. But just in these 5 states, if you look at it, and this is perhaps the one concern why anti-incumbency seems to exist at one level. We asked opinion on unemployment situation, for example. 70% in the state of Uttar Pradesh said that the unemployment situation was serious. Neutral was just 9%, not serious 19%. So 70 said it was serious. In Punjab, it went up to as high 88% said unemployment situation is serious. 6% only said not serious. In Uttarakhand, when we went, it was 81% who said it was serious. 5% said neutral, not serious was 12. Goa, 71% said serious was unemployment. Just 21% said not serious. Manipur, 80% and not serious, 10%. We are seeing this pattern emerging, Raj, in your mood of the nation. We saw it even 4 months ago in August. Employment, economy is the troubling issue on the ground, which is leading sometimes to anti-incumbency at the state, local level.
Without doubt, Rajdeep. And these are 2 factors, both rising prices and unemployment, that will, in some senses, if you see across popularity, even with Mr. Modi, when we come finally to that, begins to impact him as well. But when we are looking at the state, there are 2 factors. One, if you're looking at why in the Congress is, there's a disparity between the national leadership and what the state leadership seems stronger. If you look at it, it's largely because the national leadership doesn't seem to have a very strong narrative against Mr. Modi. After all, we are looking at these numbers are Lok Sabha numbers. So if in UP, for instance, if BJP continues to sweep at 67 seats as was projected, or in other states where Congress is ruling, it still seems to be ahead of it, except in Punjab, we've seen that. It is a fact that the Congress or the other parties that are there have not come up with an alternative narrative to Mr. Modi. So whatever happens, he is still the best bet to deliver. So even on the economy, while jobs is going to be a serious problem for the BJP and the NDA, there's no doubt about it, as well as this, for a certain amount of time, there was tolerance levels because of COVID and the fact that it damaged the economy. So people said, yes, it's an international problem now. But I think in the next year, and this will also have an impact in this elections, if this perception that they have not delivered on these 2 fronts continues, they would have problems in the states.
Because we asked people your economic status since 2014. In Uttar Pradesh, 26% said they had improved. 35% said deteriorated, no change was 36%. In Punjab, only 5% said their economic status has improved since 2014. Deteriorated said 52%, no change 36%. In Uttarakhand, 34% said improved, deteriorated 26%, no change 36%. In Goa, 10% said improved, 70% said deteriorated, 20% said no change. Manipur, 20% improved, 41% no change, 35% deteriorated. It's the economy stupid at some level, Rahul Verma. When you look at these numbers, unemployment, economic status, you get a sense that on the ground, there is discontent, and therefore whoever is in power in a state government has to combat this sense that there's no feel-good factor at the moment. There's a feel-bad factor, in fact.
But that's not happening in electoral outcomes, Rajdeep. Think
So
about
explain that. Explain that. Why is that? Why is that this doesn't reflect in electoral outcomes?
because even in 2021, Assam government came back, West Bengal government came back, Kerala government came back. Only in Tamil Nadu, basically,
There was change.
DMK took AIDMK. So I think, and look at the level of divisions within the state, right? The numbers in UP and Punjab, why do they differ? Is the economic condition in Punjab and UP so widely different? I think what's happening in Indian politics, that a large section of people have already decided who they are siding with. And then on most of the questions, they are basically reflecting partisan opinion. And that's why basically whatever they are saying so I don't think anyone is going to deny that economic situation has not been great in past 2-3 years, especially after, it was bad before COVID. COVID just sort of accelerated that situation. Despite that, we are not seeing any big change in the government. So yes, one reason could be, as Rajji pointed out, that people still at the national level might see Modi as one who might perform, because there is no other alternative at the national level. But we are not seeing any big change even at the state level. 2020, Bihar, the government came back. So I don't know whether economy, while it may remain an important factor in voters' mind, it's actually changing governments in that sense at the state level.
Yashwant, you want to quickly respond to that? Is that a big takeaway from your poll?
I actually agree with him, because it baffles me many a times, Rajdeep, because I have always seen that whenever on our tracker, corruption and inflation, they go up, they usually they kind of result in an anti-incumbent verdict. Out here, what I can sense that none of the governments which got replicated, as Rahul mentioned last year also, their perception towards corruption was actually remarkably low against the chief ministers. All the chief ministers were generally taken as a very clean chief ministers as far as the issue of corruption is concerned. I guess that probably it's the goodwill, sometimes the chief ministers or the leader, wherever they are, that have carried the day for them. And it was 10 years of incumbency in Tamil Nadu with absence of Jayalalitha that carried the day for DMK. Let's not forget that, it was just a big factor was absence of Jayalalitha in Tamil Nadu. Otherwise, 5 years before that, Jayalalitha had carried Tamil Nadu against all odds. Let's not forget that. So there is the sense, what I believe, Rajdeep, that somehow people are also trying to segregate whether they trust a leader and whether the leader is doing enough within the given circumstances. And that is probably kind of putting up their mind where they are voting for, regardless of which party the leader belongs to. If you are putting in good effort, and if you are seen as a non-corrupt guy who is trying to put in good effort, people are probably putting trust in you. That's what I feel like.
Rahul Kanwal, the final pointer you want to take us through is COVID, which is, also a shadow that has hung over this election, especially since we are in the midst of a third wave.
The biggest issue that people are dealing with is the pandemic. We're in the middle of the Omicron wave, and do voters think that the central government has done enough to deal with COVID? What we'll do is we'll compare and contrast the numbers in all the poll-bound states at one glance, so that you can get a sense of how the mood in the states differ on this question. If you look at the number of people who think in Uttar Pradesh that the government has done enough to deal with the economic fallout of COVID, 71% are saying yes, only 23% are saying no. That means that Uttar Pradesh thinks the government's done really well in dealing with COVID. Punjab is 42% yes, 46% saying no. So they're far more unhappy with the government's handling of the economic fallout of COVID. Uttarakhand is 53% saying yes, 37% saying no. Goa is 50% saying yes, they're satisfied with what the government has done in the economic fallout of COVID, 43% saying no. Manipur is 56% saying yes, 29% saying no. Now, what this suggests essentially is that Uttar Pradesh is in a stratosphere of its own, and this, when you contrast with images, say, of the floating bodies in the Ganga, on the banks of the Ganga, you'd imagine that people would be unhappy with the performance of the central government on dealing with COVID. But that is not the case. The data brings that out strong, that in Uttar Pradesh, people actually think that the government has handled the economic situation very well. How did COVID impact your economic status? Now, this is a question where people typically would not mislead voters, because you're being asked, are you better off? Are you worse off? How are you in comparison to the past? So let's take you through what the mood in the poll-bound states is. In Uttar Pradesh, 16% say their income has improved. 64% say their income has decreased. No change is 14%. In Punjab, only 7%. So less than half the number of people in Uttar Pradesh who said their income has improved. Only 7% say their income has increased in Punjab. 74% are saying their income has gone down, which is 10% more than in UP, and 12% say it hasn't changed. In Uttarakhand, 11% say their income is improved, which is less than UP but more than Punjab. 63% say their income has come down, and 16% say there's been no change. In Goa, only 9% say their income has gone up. 82% say their income has gone down, which is more than the other 4 states that I read out so far. And in Manipur, because of smaller sample, we didn't pick up anybody saying their income had improved. 85% saying their income had come down. Rahul Verma, in a poll on the question of whether your income has gone up or gone down, you're unlikely to find respondents who'd mislead. That is a typical assumption. Why then is there, and if you look at the actual economic data coming out from CMIE for unemployment in Uttar Pradesh, etc., suggests that people in Uttar Pradesh are badly impacted by the pandemic economically. However, in the poll, you've actually got a very high approval rating of the economic handling of COVID. Is that something that baffles you, or do you just think that people like the Prime Minister, they like the BJP government, and therefore they believe that they're giving the benefit of the doubt कि जो किया अच्छा ही किया, best किया भाई, अपनी तरफ से लगे हुए सुबह से शाम?
No, see, these two numbers should baffle anyone, right? On one hand, people are facing hardships, and on the second level, they are not putting the blame of those hardships on their current leaders, whether at the national level or at the state level. So, it's baffling. But this is happening survey after survey. So it's not as if this is first time happening and I should be thinking, why is this survey mysterious? And perhaps I think so there is basically one pocketbook consideration. Your pockets are getting hurt, and that is getting reflected in the surveys. But on the political side, voters have to basically choose between who the other options are, right? And it seems that they are thinking that this crisis has been created by nature. Anyone who would have been in power may not have been able to do anything different. And so, in some ways, they are basically okay with whatever the government managed to do. I don't think they are giving a high thumbs up saying, oh, very well done. But it's just sort of like taking a step back and saying, no one could have done anything differently.
Let me stop you there, because I think we've got a sense of a very complex situation which is emerging. Divergences between the state leadership perceptions and the central leadership perceptions. Clearly, economy hurting people, but not always reflecting in which way your political preferences play out. And that perhaps makes this so much more fascinating. This is, a country where, therefore, it's impossible to predict an election. And remember, as we said, it's a national poll from which we've taken these 5 states specifically because they're going to the polls. Clearly, therefore, the jury is out which way the wind is going to blow in these states. But all states, in a way, are on notice in the next 6 weeks as they go to the polls. And state governments in particular are going to have to face a tough time answering a lot of questions from voters. Thank you all very much for the first part of the Mood of the Nation. Zafar Islam, Vibhakar Shastri will be leaving us, but our other guests will stay with us as we then move to what would happen if Lok Sabha elections were held today. Does the Modi magic, as it's called, remain? Or is it also facing a bit of a strain. Back in a moment. You're watching India Today's Mood of the Nation January 2022 poll. Okay, let's first give you the number that you've been looking for. The number, as I said, the India Today Mood of the Nation poll brought to you by Yashwant Deshmukh's C Voter. And this is what it says. Projected seat share. If elections were held today, the NDA we are projecting would get in January 2092 296. That's down from 353 Lok Sabha, but still substantially higher than the opposition, because the UPA goes only till 127 and others are 120. So what the big picture is, if Lok Sabha elections held today, the NDA remains the dominant force at the moment. Others have climbed up from 97 to 120 in the last 2 years, and the Congress or the UPA has climbed out from 93 to 127. But there is still a substantial gap. So the disjunction between state national elections becoming clearer. We also take a look at now seat-wise. The BJP is exactly at the halfway mark on its own. 271 as per the India Today Mood of the Nation done by C Voter. The Congress is 62, marginal improvement. The TMC is 35, rock solid on that number which it had last time. AAP is 4, others are 171. In fact, the TMC rising compared to the 2019 elections. So that's the picture that we have. The first big numbers. Joining us now, Yashwant Deshmukh of C Voter, who's done the poll. Rahul Verma, fellow at the Center for Policy Research and Psephologist. Raj Chengappa, the editorial director of India Today, is with us. And also joining us, Shehzad Poonawalla of the BJP, Supriya Srinath of the Congress, and Dr. Shashi Panja of the Trinamool Congress. Let's get you, Yashwant Deshmukh. It's your number, your polls. Explain this to us. In the first part today, we saw state governments facing a measure of anti-incumbency, but it appears that if a general election was held, the NDA does better. Is that the pattern at the moment, that state elections, governments vulnerable, including BJP governments, but when it's a national election, the NDA has the edge?
Well, Rajdeep, the survey very clearly indicates the vulnerabilities of the BJP and NDA in the very expected spots. The survey very clearly says that TMC is likely to sweep if the elections are held today for the Lok Sabha in the West Bengal, state of West Bengal. The opposition alliance is likely to sweep Maharashtra, bringing the BJP numbers, NDA numbers down by a big number. The opposition is likely to make a comeback. Opposition, when I say opposition, means Congress, likely to make a very strong comeback even in the state of Karnataka, where BJP swept last time, one-way traffic. Having said that, Congress is also making a very good revival in Haryana. In that also the survey points out. Having said that, all this, even after all this, largely what I can tell you that the NDA numbers, the drop in NDA numbers from 2019 have to be largely attributed to the coalition partners going away from the NDA. Shiv Sena going away from the NDA and joining the UPA rank and file. Akali Dal going away from the NDA and still not joining the opposition rank and file, but still not being part of the NDA anymore. So, barring these major exodus because these two major alliance partners, I don't see much of a damage as far as the national NDA vote share or the BJP vote share is concerned. In fact, Rajdeep, in Uttar Pradesh, the best possible combination that could have happened in 2019 was SP and the BSP. And if I may say so, if the SP-BSP combination could have continued in assembly election, it would have been a very difficult election for the BJP. But now that they are going in their own different ways, UP has become actually, for the Lok Sabha election, much easier for the BJP.
Right.
In assembly, they are still finding it, some competition for Akhilesh because he has taken one pole position as far as the opposition leadership is concerned. But Akhilesh numbers in different trackers and different surveys, even then his individual numbers are ranging in the 30 to 35% category when you compare it to the positive potential combined vote share with Mayawati of 45%. That is not happening.
Right.
So all in all, NDA is sitting pretty at this point of time.
Rahul Kanwal will give us the breakdown in a moment, but Raj Chengappa, your first reaction. What it appears from what Yashwant Deshmukh says, if Lok Sabha polls held today, the BJP suffers or the NDA suffers damage in Maharashtra. They've lost an ally in Shiv Sena, the second largest state, Maharashtra, with 48 seats. Suffers in Karnataka, which they had swept last time. Takes a bit of a hit in Haryana, which they had swept last time. But despite that, seems to be holding its own clearly, because in the Hindi heartland, by and large, the BJP still remains the dominant force. So it almost seems that 2.5 years, and we are at the midway point, in a way, of this term of Mr. Modi, the NDA is still way ahead of its rivals, even though it's declined from 350 plus to below 300.
Rajdeep, I would look at the results in a sort of a mixed bag for both BJP and the NDA. The good news for them is that they have stopped hemorrhaging. If you saw a poll in August 2021, for the first time, the BJP numbers fell below the majority mark, went down to 269. Okay, and the NDA also dropped significantly. I think it lost about 50 seats. What the good news for them is that, and this seems largely because of the performance during the second wave. The good news is that they've weathered that storm, and they seem to have held their own and not continued to hemorrhage downwards. So that's the one side of the
because
the
in
story.
August, the poll was held in the backdrop of the second wave, and clearly the NDA and the BJP was taking a hit.
A very bad hit, right? They had dropped significantly, and for the first time, they were not getting a majority. In this also, they are yet to hit the majority. They are just halfway through. They're there, but they seem to have that stability and the fact that they've recovered and not gone down further. So that's the first part. And given the fact that you had three major crises confront the government, whether it is COVID, the economic fallout of COVID, and the Chinese intrusion. These were difficult things for any government to handle, and many tall leaders would have been felled by these things. But the fact that they held is good news for them. I think the bad news, if there is a bad news, or maybe a news for concern, is that there is still a lot of caveats being put into this. They are not shooting up. There has been an economic recovery, which the people acknowledge and say, yes, in the last 2 quarters you've done well, so we're not dropping you. And there seems to be some favor in terms of handling of COVID. Clearly, it's a positive because compared to the second wave. But there are large concerns that they should have, if this number stops at this level, it's a great worry for them. I think just one more point I'll make, Rajdeep, is that I think the opposition should look back and say, how come we have not dropped them far below? And that is a failing of the opposition.
That's a major point to take to you, Rahul Verma, because we saw even in the August mood of the nation that there was a feel-bad factor, particularly in the backdrop of COVID 2.0. The economy was hurting. Despite that, the NDA 4 months later seems to have stabilized, and the opposition has not been able to fully capitalize on this seeming feel-bad factor that exists on the ground, whether it's with the economy or whether it's with COVID. Are you surprised?
Not really. The discussion so far, basically what it is suggesting, that in most of the states where BJP managed to make inroads in 2014, 2019, they are holding it. And they're basically holding it in north and west of India, in the heartland and western parts. Now, in most of these states, basically beginning from Haryana to Maharashtra, to Karnataka and MP, Chhattisgarh, the principal opposition is Congress. Except UP and Bihar, where state-level parties come up, their principal competition is Congress, and it somehow seems that Congress is still not being able to challenge BJP's performance, BJP's narrative on the ground, be its failure in sort of like controlling the price rise, managing the economy, or COVID. So I think that's the first thing which is happening. So BJP's losses are coming from just Maharashtra, Haryana, and perhaps West Bengal, where last time they had
and some
18
Karnataka.
Seats. Some from Karnataka. Second, I think what is sort of like challenging for BJP, that they are also not being able to break new grounds, meaning they're not making further inroads in Bengal Odisha, Andhra, Telangana, or Tamil Nadu, or Kerala, right? So basically, the coast of Bay of Bengal still remains far away from BJP's reaches. I think those two are, and so things to look forward is basically within the next 2 years, whether BJP can make up for the losses in these states and get new ground.
Let's get quick political reactions to those first big numbers. Supriya Srinath, you from the Congress first, then Shehzad Poonawalla can respond. Supriya Srinath, clearly at the moment, if elections were held today, Narendra Modi would be returning as Prime Minister as per our numbers.
So let's not talk about whether elections were held today or not. Let's actually discuss for a moment the 5 elections the states that are going into elections, and BJP is not going to win even one of those, and that's the reality on the ground. I see reality from very different from what you're projecting here, with all due respect to the survey and all due respect to the respondents. What has changed since August 2021 and now? Unemployment has gone up, prices, inflation has gone up, poverty, 4.8 crore people pushed into abject poverty. 27 rupees average income of the farmer, 170 continues to be the minimum wage. The disparity between the rich and the poor has only widened. So who's happy and who are your respondents? I'm actually a little amused by what you're saying.
Why are they saying, why are they still voting? Why, when they're asked the question in our poll, as per the poll, they are saying we would still vote in many of these states with the BJP?
I have done many opinion polls as far as the state of Uttar Pradesh, for instance, is concerned, where I come from. And the BJP was in a very comfortable position and they were going to come back. Look at the desertion that's happening in their camp. You think these people don't understand politics? It's because the BJP is facing abject removal from the state of Uttar Pradesh, or for that matter, the other 4 states that are going into elections. And that is precisely the case which will happen with Mr. Modi too. I don't understand that Mr. Modi's popularity fell from 66% to 24% in August 2021. What has revived it?
Okay, very quickly before
poverty has gone up,
you made the point before Rahul Kanwal takes over with the number. Just a minute. Shehzad Poonawalla, you want to give a quick first reaction. What it suggests is, in the first half of our program today, we saw that in state governments, there is a measure of anger against state leaderships. 4 of the 5 ruled by the BJP. But when it comes to national elections, you seem to hold your own, except in some states like Maharashtra and Karnataka. Maharashtra, where you've lost an ally like the Shiv Sena. Your first reaction?
Rajdeep, this is an endorsement for what I call the 4 V. V for Vikas, V for Vyavastha, V for Virasat, and V for welfare. This is the combination that every government of Bharatiya Janata Party, particularly led by Narendra Modi ji at the center, delivers on. Let me just give you some examples. Let's go for Vikas. Today, in the name of Vikas, you can see the collections of GST for the last 6 months have been more than 1 lakh crore. The December collection was actually more than the pre-pandemic period. My dear friend Supriya ji talks about unemployment. Maybe she would like to see 27% is the unemployment rate in Rajasthan as per CMIE data. And the same CMIE data has said that we created 85 lakh new jobs just in the month of September. And also, I would like to inform her that as far as the economic growth is concerned, we have now almost reached the pre-pandemic levels of growth. We are going to be the fastest growing economy in the next time to come.
We are also talking before you came on the show in the first part, in every state that we polled, the unemployment situation is seen as serious. And a majority of the people said their economic situation has declined since 24. No, just a minute, Supriya. He did not interrupt with you, Supriya. In every state, they are seeing their income levels having gone down, unemployment being a serious concern. So let's not minimize that.
No. Look, Raji, I am not minimizing it, but I am saying that there are 2 aspects on which people vote. 1, the problem, and 2, who will be the solution for the problem. The Congress is not looked as a solution for resolving any of these countries' problems. Let me give you an example. When it comes to Garibi, इनके तो 4 generations Garibi हटाओ का नारा लगाते रहे. But today, connecting the poorest of the poor with Jan Dhan, connecting them with toilets, connecting them with Ujjwala Yojana, connecting them with Saubhagya, connecting them with the basic Ayushman Bharat, this has been delivered on the ground. The Nal Se Jal Yojana, these Yojanas are transformed transforming lives in the way that Supriya Srine, and she's a privileged person. I'm very happy for her. She comes from a privileged background. Her father was an MP. She will never understand these things. For her, poverty is an experience or a state of mind that you have to experience after going and having lunch with somebody. But this is not how it works. In Rajasthan, for instance, the farmers are on the streets. The Bajra farmers, the farmers in Hanumangarh were beaten up, and today you have farmers losing their lands because Rahul Gandhi did not fulfill their promise.
Very quickly, Supriya Srine, because we want to move on with our numbers. This is not a regular political. Just a minute now, Shehzad. Shehzad, you made your point. You made your point. You made your point. Rahul Kanwal, why don't you take over? You made your point. Let's get in more numbers.
No, I have a point to make. No. Please give me a chance to speak. I think it's my reply.
Okay.
BJP will not even stop at bringing my dead father to this. So thank you very much. Yes, I'm indeed very proud of him, and I'm very proud for the rights that he stood for. Thank you for bringing him in. But just to put it in perspective, CMI data ka aap baat kar rahe hain. Please keep quiet. Please keep quiet.
Family of Prime Minister every now and then.
Please keep quiet.
Madam, please, I'm being respectful to you. Rajdeep and Rahul, look, I am very respectful.
No, Shehzad, let her finish. Let her finish. Let's not make any personal. This is not a debate. This is not a debate, regular debate. We are giving everyone equal chance. Very quickly, Supriya, whatever point you want to make.
Yes.
The BJP is quoting the CMI data. Mr. Khattar says he will go against the CMI to court. He will sue the CMI. Mr. Yogi is going to show their figures. This is the BJP. You want to talk about economic growth pre-pandemic level. Mr. Shehzad Poonawalla, we contracted by 24%. We are barely above the ground. Our real rate of growth will be less than 1% for this year. What are you talking about? First, understand economics, understand the numbers, and then come and spew.
Let's go back.
The reality is, it will take us 3 years to go to the pre-pandemic levels.
No.
And it is thanks to them.
No, you can't respond. Rahul Kanwal has more numbers. Okay, let's go back to the numbers. Rahul, give us the sense of how these numbers are breaking down, because it's clear at the moment, as per our numbers, the NDA is well ahead of the UPA and others. But give us a sense of why this is happening.
So the overall picture is that the NDA would form a government if elections are held today. But the moment you go into a state-by-state breakup, there are some very interesting themes that emerge. Themes of losses for the BJP in states like Karnataka and consolidation in certain pockets. So let's run you through how the big states are projected to fare if elections were held to the Lok Sabha at this moment. And I'll start with Rajasthan, where the NDA is expected to bag 24 seats, the Congress only one. In the Lok Sabha elections, the BJP had 25, so it comes down by one, but essentially the BJP holding on in Rajasthan. From there, let's come to Gujarat, which will become very crucial because you have a big assembly election coming up later in the year. In Gujarat, the BJP expected to bag 25 out of the 26 seats. The Congress gets only one. So at least as far as the Lok Sabha is concerned, the BJP strong in its bastion of Gujarat. From there, let's come to Maharashtra, where there is a big upset in the works. And part of this is the fact that you've got the Shiv Sena, the Congress, and the NCP fighting as an alliance. And if that were to continue till 2024, it is a massive headache for Messrs. Fadnavis, Shah and Modi, because the Mood of the Nation opinion poll projects that the UPA combined could get 32 seats, the NDA only 16. So BJP tally crashing, the UPA at 32. If you look at what happened in Maharashtra in the previous elections, you had 16 for the BJP, but that's because at that time the scenario was different from what we're seeing right now. So there's a big loss for the BJP in the works in Maharashtra, where when they fought with the Shiv Sena, they did far better than if these three parties get together and fight as one alliance. From Maharashtra, let's now come to the next state. Give me a moment as I call up the data of Karnataka. Here again, the BJP likely to fall to 17, the Congress at 10, and the others at 1. Remember, the BJP had 26 seats in the 2019 Lok Sabha elections in Karnataka, so coming down to 17 would be a blow. 10 seats projected for the Congress, where in 2019 they had only 2. So a big advantage to the Congress in Karnataka. and a big loss for the BJP in the southern state of Karnataka. And that gives a lot to think about, because you've got an assembly election coming up later, and it suggests that things aren't looking so rosy for the BJP at this moment in Karnataka. From there, let's come to Tamil Nadu, where the UPA, that's largely the DMK, they have the Congress and some regional allies with them, likely to bag 39 seats. This again is earlier they had 38, so that's one more, but this is in keeping with what happened in the 2019 Lok Sabha elections, where MK Stalin led the DMK, and by default the UPA to a very strong performance in Tamil Nadu. From Tamil Nadu, let's go across to Bihar, where there was a tough, tricky assembly election. But if the Lok Sabha elections were to be held right now, the NDA expected to get 30, the UPA 10. And here Yashwant is assuming that the RJD and the Congress will fight together, which is not the case at this moment, and he can explain that, but 0 for the others in Bihar. Let's come to Madhya Pradesh, where 26 leads for the BJP in Madhya Pradesh. They had 28 in the last Lok Sabha election, so that's 2 down, but largely doing well in Madhya Pradesh. The Congress had 1, that's expected to go up to 3, so minor gains in Madhya Pradesh for the Congress. From there, let's come to Andhra Pradesh. Now, if you've seen how with Amit Shah himself, Mr. Nadda, G. Kishan Reddy, they're trying to make an effort in Telangana and in Andhra Pradesh. In Andhra Pradesh, it doesn't seem to be coming to any fruition, because the NDA isn't expected to bag any seats in Andhra Pradesh. Neither is the Congress. The large majority of the seats going to Jagan Reddy still, and Yashwant can give us the breakup. And lastly, I come to West Bengal, where the Trinamool is expected to bag 35 seats. The BJP would have hoped that since this is a Lok Sabha election, that they would do better, but that doesn't come out, because in the Lok Sabha elections in 2019, the BJP picked up 18 seats. That tally now expected to crash to 7. Mamata Banerjee had lost a lot of ground in the Lok Sabha elections. She's expected to go up from 22 to 35. So do you want to explain that? The big loss in Karnataka for the BJP, and the fact that the BJP would want, and they still will deny your numbers, Yashwant, because they'd imagine that from 18 they'll be able to increase it in 2024, whereas your current numbers seem to suggest they're crashing to half of what they got in the last Lok Sabha elections, which is totally different from the BJP's own calculation.
Sure. Should I proceed on this, Rahul? I mean,
Yashwant, tell us Bengal, because then we can go to Dr. Panja also from the Trinamool Congress on that.
Yashwant.
yeah, sure. So it's Bengal is all the way 50% plus vote share for Trinamool Congress, and there is actually no other party in contest as such, because it is a directly bipolar contest between the BJP and Trinamool, and it's almost like 16-point lead for Trinamool Congress, and which is going to give almost one-way traffic to Trinamool Congress as on today, if the elections are held. BJP is likely to poll roughly about 34% at this point of time, which is about 4 or 5 points less than what they polled in the assembly election. That is a kind of a reversal, I would say, because generally BJP tends to poll more than their assembly election vote share as far as the Lok Sabha elections are concerned. But not in this case, probably because many BJP supporters were left high and dry. We know the political situation the way they are, and Mamata Banerjee, if she tries to convince the Bengali mindset that okay, I am now the prime ministerial candidate, then that identity is also going to play its own thing.
Very interesting, because it seems that the honeymoon effect from a big victory in May of 2021 remains in January of 2022 for Mamata Banerjee, but the Trinamool is not expanding as per our poll beyond Bengal. It's still seen very much as a Bengal party. Dr. Panja, so there's good and bad news for you. You all are doing very well in Bengal if there was even a Lok Sabha poll today, but you're not expanding anywhere else. Perhaps because, as we are finding even in Goa in these assembly elections, you're still identified as a Bengal party. Is that going to be a challenge for you in the next 2 years? There's so much of talk that Trinamool Congress wants to go national. How will you go national?
No, I think we've gained a lot of ground, because when we expanded to Tripura, in just about barely 3 months, and there was an election in Tripura, a very recent election, and we became the principal opposition party out there with almost 25% of the votes. Just barely 3 months. of campaigning there. And similarly, even in Goa, just about 3 months into Goa, and I think we are doing very well. We have our own calculations too. We've also come out with our list of candidates and shortly again with the second list. We are, Mamata Banerjee also has visited out there and there's a very positive response.
So you will go national. So you will continue to go national.
No,
so Trinamool Congress will continue to go national. But, the interesting part is that Rahul Verma, there is others also. If you look at our poll, there's a large number of other smaller parties like the Trinamool Congress who are not part of the UPA. And there's so much of talk of a grand alliance. Given these numbers, do you think there will be even more pressure on political parties? You need a grand alliance. If you have to take on a juggernaut like the BJP, you're going to have to settle your personal divisions and work together.
Yes, but it's difficult to forge grand alliances, especially when survival is not at stake or there is a larger political will which drives those grand alliances. So grand alliances are easy to talk, but hard to implement on the ground. And even if, say, some of these opposition parties decided to join hands, I'm not sure how they are going to add to each other's kitty. What will Trinamool Congress add to Congress party in Madhya Pradesh? Or will think about this. See, there is a game. So right now the game is not only to challenge or defeat BJP. The game among India's political parties, Trinamool, Aam Aadmi Party and the Congress is also up to basically who's going to be the challenger to the BJP. So they are also going to basically fight for a space for the second position. Aam Aadmi Party wants to expand itself in Uttarakhand, in Goa, same Trinamool Congress. Who are they going to challenge? Not just BJP. They are also going to take away the votes from Congress. So I think this is basically what I will call as cheap talk.
At the end of the day,
it's hard politics.
There's an interesting data point which is coming about Maharashtra. One of the most interesting changes that our Mood of the Nation is showing is Maharashtra. 43 out of 48 seats went to the NDA when the Shiv Sena BJP were together in 2019 Lok Sabha. Now we are projecting that they are coming down to 16 and the MVA is the dominant alliance, the NCP Congress Shiv Sena alliance. So maybe there's a story there. Shehzad Poonawalla, you're from Maharashtra. Does that trouble you? The one troubling news for the BJP is that where the opposition comes together, like in Maharashtra, the BJP becomes vulnerable. That's where the arithmetic starts hurting you. Is that something that should worry you as the BJP goes ahead?
Rajdeep, Maharashtra is as much your state as mine, and let me tell you, arithmetic se politics nahi hoti. Politics is all about chemistry. And Rajdeep, let me tell you, arithmetically, BSP and SP was perhaps the strongest political arithmetic alliance that could have ever been forged in the last 50 years, in my opinion. But what did it result on the ground? Because just by convenient political arithmetic, you can't have social coalitions on the ground. Let me give an example. Just recently, the Panchayat election, the Nagar Panchayat election has taken place in Maharashtra. BJP has emerged as the single largest party, bagging over 400 parshads. So this is the reality on the ground. And let me tell you what we are doing. We are not sitting idle. Look, these people are people with wanting position, with ambition, but without any vision. They are only on television. And therefore, party with a mission, that means BJP. And what is our mission? The mission is to create a new vital vote bank, which is above 50%, and it's not based on religion, caste, etc. like they are moving. We are trying to create a new vote bank of beneficiaries. The Jal Sena Yojana, the Ujwala Yojana, the Shauchalaya Yojana, the Jan Dhan Yojana, the Yojanas that transform lives is going to create a vote bank of
you're
above
saying you're trying to create a vote bank of beneficiaries or Labharthis. Let's look at that. We asked performance of NDA. The performance of NDA satisfied in our Mood of the Nation in 2021 was 53%. It's now up to 59%. Unsatisfied was 17% in MOTN August to 2021. It is up to 26. But what is generally seen is, as Raj was saying, that the slide has been arrested. August 2021 saw a slide. Performance of Prime Minister Modi. In our Mood of the Nation in August, good was 54%. It's up to 63%. Average was 30%. It's halved to 15%. Poor was 16%. It's up to 21%. So by and large, there has been an arrest of the decline. There was a sharp decline in the Prime Minister's popularity and that of the NDA in August of 2021. It's now crept up slightly, and that might explain the chemistry of this election, Raj Chengappa, that you've been referring to. That while the arithmetic in some states is going against the BJP, Bengal and Maharashtra good examples, the chemistry by and large still remains with the Prime Minister, and therefore the NDA benefits.
You know, the results do show that the respondents, I can't say voters, the respondents of this survey do believe that the Prime Minister still remains the best bet for the country. And the reasons are, you know, midway through Dr. Manmohan Singh's second term, his popularity had wilted considerably. But when you look at Mr. Modi, through these three, you know, a triad of crises that struck the country, if you're able to hold popularity levels that not only he has stopped the hemorrhaging that happened, that it went down to 54%, but improved to 62%, is highly creditable. So there is a larger message that is coming, that in terms of alternatives, Mr. Modi is still seen as the best person to do this, the best bet.
In fact, let's look at the numbers. Best suited to be next PM is a question, direct question posed. In MOTN 2021, January 2021, it was 38%. It went down to 24% in August 2021. That was the lowest that Prime Minister Modi's popularity had gone in terms of being asked a direct question. Best suited to be PM was only 24% in the aftermath of COVID 2.0. It's now back to 53%. Very significant. In fact, in January 2022, Mr. Modi preferred by 53%, Rahul Gandhi by 7%, Yogi Adityanath 6%, Amit Shah by 4%. So that really seems to be the critical point where the Modi factor works. Yes, very quickly,
No,
Raj.
I just want to finish the point that I was making. You're right. If you look at the gap now between Rahul Gandhi and Narendra Modi, the gap is phenomenal, 46%, whereas in 2021, August 2021, it was just 14%. So clearly, Mr. Modi has demonstrated that he's got, he has the capability to weather the crisis. But we always, therefore, if you see the cover headline of our magazine, which says, "In Modi we trust," and then we have 3 dots.
So the trust factor seems to have returned much more, and when there was an element of concern in August of 2021.
That has come, but when we put the 3 dots, there is also, using that phrase, "In God we trust, in Modi we trust, but." And if you see when we did the previous thing on the states, the thing that is coming through is on the economy and jobs. So in Modi we trust, but jobs we want.
We'll come to that. Rahul will tell us in terms of biggest achievement, biggest failure in a moment. But Supriya, Srinath, you want to respond to that? Because that's what it's coming. Chemistry was, the chemistry is where the Congress or the opposition has been unable to benefit from the clear decline we saw in August, even in the Prime Minister's popularity. He's back up and you're not able to exploit the situation.
I have a very simple question to ask. When the BJP loses all the 5 states that it is going into election, 4 of which it is defending, what will it mean for Mr. Modi? Will this survey then stand true? Will respondents, quote unquote, of this survey stand true? Or will voters who will vote out the BJP stand true? Trust me on this, it's going to be a whitewash. Nil bata sannata hone wala hai Bharatiya Janata Party.
No, so you're making a distinction between state and general election. You're making a distinction between state and general elections.
No, I'm not. I'm telling you why. Because in all these states, what are they fighting the election on? They're fighting it in the face of Mr. Modi. He is the mascot even in Uttar Pradesh. Mr. Yogi has been sidelined. He's been sent to Gorakhpur. Who is this election being fought for? The Prime Minister came 11 times in a month and a half to UP. This is going to be a mandate on him. The floating dead bodies, or for that matter, the nurses who are beaten up, or for that matter, the people who are unemployed. This is a mandate on him. रोजगार मांग रहा है देश, कौन देगा रोजगार? 8 साल से सरकार में टेलीप्रॉम्प्टर फेल होता है, भाषण जी भी ढेर हो जाते हैं, रोजगार की बात कौन करेगा? ये बताइए मुझे। दावोस में आप बड़ी-बड़ी बात करिएगा, अरे अपने लोगों से तो बात करिए।
Let's look at those issues, Rahul again do a deep dive into those numbers. When you look at it, the Prime Minister's popularity is slightly up, considerably up compared to the decline, the hit it took in August of 2021. You want to explain what are seen as achievements, failures?
Now it's very interesting because in the imagination or perception of people in the opposition or those who don't like Prime Minister Modi and the current BJP government, the handling of COVID has been one of the biggest failures of this government. But when you ask respondents in the India Today Mood of the Nation opinion poll, their perception of the government's handling of COVID is very different. So let's take on our screen right now data for what people believe is the biggest achievement of the current Modi Sarkar. 22% of the respondents say the handling of COVID is the number one achievement. If you look back in August, this was at 12. In January 2021, it was at 15. In August, it was at 7. So you've actually seen people's perception of the government's handling of COVID go up. So what was earlier seen as a big downer, was seen as something which would be a knockout punch for the government, is today perceived as its greatest achievement, as its big achievement. That people feel that with Modi at the helm, we've actually come out stronger or better from COVID than we would have had another government being in place. And this is one of the biggest headlines emerging from this India Today See Voter Mood of the Nation opinion poll, that it is actually the handling of the COVID pandemic, which according to this very credible tracker is seen as the number one achievement. Now, if you're watching on TV at this moment or on social media, you may have a different take, but this is the big national picture that emerges from this poll. At number 2 is the building of the Ram temple in Ayodhya and the Kashi Vishwanath corridor. Now there, if you compare with August 2021, where 29% thought that the building of the Ram temple was the biggest achievement, it's actually come down to 15.7%. So in the way that I see it, people seem to have factored in कि हाँ ये तो हो गया, Ram temple तो अब बन रहा है, so it's not that big a deal, because in January 2021, 27% said it's the biggest achievement. From there, it's actually come down to 15.7%. So Ram temple hazam ho gaya in the sense that people imagine that, okay, now we've got a Ram temple going and that's a good thing, we appreciate it, but it's not necessarily the biggest achievement. It's now being taken as a given. Then the revocation of Article 370 in Kashmir. 12% say it's the number one achievement. Here again, you go back into past data, it shows you how in August 2021, 22% said this was the number one achievement. And in January 2021, 20% said it's the number one achievement. So since then, it's actually come down. There again, yeah, so these are people who are impatient for change. They applauded the revocation of Article 370, but now it's a done deal. So this can't be a big achievement. Dil mange more. We want more. This is a population that's constantly putting its government to the test and saying, okay, move ahead. You've done Ram Temple. You've done the revocation of 370. Great. What next? If I go down below on that list, you've got things like the Swachh Bharat Mission, Ujjwala Yojana, the fact that this is perceived as a corruption-free government, and the crackdown on black money through demonetization also show up. Now remember, government critics think of demonetization as one of its biggest failures. It's actually seen as one of the top few strengths and achievements of the Modi government in the eyes of the Indian voter, and that matters, which also explains some of these election results. So those are the big achievements. Let's now switch to the biggest failures of the Modi Sarkar, and this is where the BJP top brass have things to worry about, because at this moment, price rise and inflation is coming out as the number one worry of voters. It was 29% in our last tracker in August, 13% before that, 11% in August 2020. So if you look at the trackers we did last year, the number of people who are now worried about inflation and price rise is twice of the number of people who are worried about inflation and price rise in the previous trackers from last year. So that's one key takeaway. Unemployment remains the number 2 concern area or the failure of the Modi Sarkar, where 13.6% of the respondents say unemployment is their number 1 fear and the biggest failure of the Modi Sarkar. It's been worse. In January 2021, it was at 29%, then it came down to 23%. So if you were a BJP supporter, you could look at this data and say, yes, unemployment is always problematic, but it's actually getting better. At least the perception is getting better. From 29, it's now down to 13.6, but it's the number 2 worry even at this moment. Then there is the farmers' protest and distress. And here, what's interesting is that farmer protest seems to have struck a chord where the number of people nationally who think that farmer distress and protest is the number 1 issue is up at 10.3. In previous polls in August 2020, for example, it was only 6%. From there, it kept inching up. And even though the agitation is now over and the farmers are back home and the farm laws have been scrapped, This is the number 3 worry as far as people across the country are concerned. And this would be a good opportunity to go across to Rahul Verma and understand from him how farmers' protest seems to be registering high up. It wasn't this big a number earlier, and it's not just in Punjab but even nationally. People perceiving farmers' protest is one of the key problems, as also inflation, which comes in at number 1.
In fact, if I may add to what Rahul is saying before Rahul Verma, if you put all those three together, 25% inflation, 14% unemployment, 10%, it comes to roughly half are worried about some element linked to economic distress. Is that the one Achilles heel, clear Achilles heel of this government at the moment?
Thank you, Rahul and Rajdeep. In my opinion, survey after survey, we have been seeing that this pocketbook consideration, inflation, unemployment, economy, is all basically ranking up very, very high in surveys. This is happening since, I think, 2017, 2018, and every year the number seems to going up. The government, both at the national and state level, should be concerned because, economy can anytime spill into anger and you could be voted out. But for last 3 years, at least whatever the results have been either at the national level or in the states, we are not seeing governments being voted out. In fact, most of the governments are returning. And so I'm not sure basically what might be happening in Indian politics, and this is what requires deep thinking. I don't have easy answers to it. That something which is happening in electoral arena is very, very different from what is happening in social arena and what is happening in the economic arena. So you are seeing large-scale protests, but those protests are not basically putting electoral cost on the government. So these two things are very, very different. Second, Rajdeep, and I'll finish here. I think, and this is perhaps politically not correct to say, but at least in surveys, voters are being very short-sighted or myopic, in a sense that short-term considerations are basically driving their responses. So if you look at your own mood of the nation trends, basically just after second COVID wave, everything was bad. Or just after, 2019 Pulwama, Balakot and Prime Minister coming back, everything goes up. So I think basically short-term factors are guiding voters' response. But in politics, the electoral outcomes are determined by political structures. And those two things are going very separate.
Very interesting, because that brings me to the next point, because there is this question, is there an alternative? At the end of the day, politics is also about choosing alternatives. We asked, who is best suited to succeed Modi as a BJP leader of the future? In the MOTN of January 2021, 30% said Amit Shah. It came down in August 21 poll, and he remains at 24%. Yogi Adityanath has gone up marginally from 21% in January of 2021 to 23%. He is, of course, in the public eye at the moment because of the UP elections. But we also asked, who's best suited to lead the opposition? And here there's an interesting finding. In the MOTN January 2022, Mamata Banerjee is at 17%, Arvind Kejriwal is 16%, Rahul Gandhi is 11%. And I've been looking at back data. This is the first time that Mamata Banerjee is the #1 candidate seen best suited to lead opposition. Again, this may be an effect of a big victory just 6 months ago, the fact she's in the eye, and Arvind Kejriwal also picking up. Rahul Gandhi to that extent losing out. Normally, Rahul Gandhi has been seen as the best suited to lead opposition because of the strong presence of the Congress in the opposition. Quick reactions to that. Shashi Panja, you first. Here is some good news. The question is whether Mamata Banerjee really can bring all the opposition together, or is she an Ekla Chalore leader?
No. She has been one of the formidable challengers to the BJP, undoubtedly. I think you all agree on that. And secondly, she's also been one of those leaders who has vouched for unity of the opposition. Absolutely, she has said, in fact, even now, in Uttar Pradesh, we are not politically contesting, and that's not the priority. We are there to support Samajwadi Party and Akhilesh Yadav as and when he needs us. So it is mainly that we need to stitch an alliance, just like we did in Goa.
No, you want to stitch an alliance or take over the Congress? You want to stitch an alliance or break the Congress and emerge as the real Congress?
Absolutely not. We have made an offer to the Congress and it is there in the public domain. Our national vice president has put it out in the public domain.
Do you want to nationally become the real Congress?
Mr. Chidambaram? No.
Forget about Goa. These numbers are national. Do you want Mamata Banerjee to lead the opposition?
Why not? I mean, if the nation wants, why not? It's not that Mamata Banerjee is vying for it. The nation may want it.
Okay. You know, we just have enough time for final comments. Supriya Shrineth, you want to give a final comment? Look, as I come back to it, from August 2021, where the BJP and the Prime Minister appeared at a low, they seem to have slowly climbed back. Is part of the problem the Congress's inability to set a clear narrative of change?
No, absolutely not. I totally refute this. And before I take your direct question, I'll take 10 seconds to put on record some things that were said before me by previous speakers. Let us not shy away from demonetization. It's not the critics who are criticizing. It's demonetization halved our economic growth from 8.2 to 4.1% pre-pandemic. Point number one. Point number two, people said governments are being voted back. No, sir, governments are not being voted back. Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Goa, Karnataka, Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur. There are examples. Yes, we see how the BJP misuses its agencies and the money power and topples democratically elected government. So that, and again, a second point, 700 farmers dead. A constitutional authority has said that the Prime Minister said they have not died for me. You think people are not going to vote on this? You think people are not taking cognizance of the fact that Ajay Mishra Teni continues to be India's Home Minister and his son is the main accused in the Lakhimpur massacre? What are you talking about?
So you're basically saying our poll does not reflect the mood on the ground.
Vote in these elections.
Okay, you're saying this poll doesn't reflect the mood on the ground?
It certainly does not, at least the ground that I'm covering.
Okay.
At least the ground that I'm traveling.
Let me give Shehzad Poonawalla 30 seconds as well. Shehzad Poonawalla, what's your biggest takeaway from this mood of the nation?
Rajdeep, first of all, if this is not the mood of the nation and Supriya ji is so sure about what is going to happen in the 5 states, Priyanka Vadra should contest from Gorakhpur. I offer her the opportunity that she should come and test the ground on Gorakhpur and she should declare that so that we can then conclusively say that mood of the nation poll is rubbish and what Supriya ji is saying is correct. Now, as far as this poll is concerned, the last part shows one thing, that Congress is fighting for existence, Trinamool cannibalizing Congress is fighting for sustenance and BJP is fighting for excellence. BJP's mission is excellence and therefore you see the COVID handling. 160 crore vaccines doses have been delivered. Almost 19 times the German population. Rajdeep, I did not interrupt anybody. She has cannibalized my time, although she can't cannibalize anybody else politically. She has cannibalized my time and you're allowing her to interrupt me to not allow me to have a say.
30 seconds.
This is not the way.
No. Shehzad, yes, quickly.
Yeah, this is not the way, Rajdeep. You're a fair anchor. This should not be allowed. Thank you.
30 seconds. Finish your 30 seconds. Shehzad.
Yeah. So Rajdeep, you know, Tina has now been replaced by Tima. Tima means that trust in Modi always and trust in Modi always कि आपदा को भी हमने अवसर बनाया, लोगों की जिंदगियों को निहारा, कोरोना काल में हमने 160 करोड़ वैक्सीन डोजेस दिए, 19 बार जर्मनी को वैक्सीनेट करने जैसा कार्य था.
Your time is up, but I can tell you with all your one-liners and acronyms, the Prime Minister will be very happy with you. He's a master of acronyms. But final word to the editor of the magazine. Your cover is "In Modi We Trust." Am I correct?
Yes.
Do you believe, though, it's trust, but with a qualification?
Yes, and plenty of them.
Plenty of qualifications, starting primarily with the economy.
Yes, I think that's where he really needs to focus on. I don't agree with what Rahul Verma said, that in the past, these listings of inflation or prices going up and jobs really didn't make a difference to voting. I think we've had a pandemic, and if you see some of the devastation that has been caused in terms of drop of incomes and everything else, this government the India government can ignore these only at its own peril. So his big task in the remaining tenure of his is he must ensure that not only does the economy recover, but India becomes prosperous. The other task, I would think, and that comes out through the other findings that is that there is need for him to be the great unifier. There is a lot of distrust across the country, a polarization that is there. He needs to be the unifying face, and that should be his other mission.
Well, that's going to be a big challenge. The silence of the government at times over hate speech, for example, is something they've got to consider. Clearly the economy, though, remains the biggest concern for the government. But perhaps Mr. Modi is still seen, as the cover says, as the leader whom the most number of Indians continue to trust when it comes to electoral preferences. And maybe there's a disjunction at times between your political preferences and social and economic issues. On that note, to all my panelists on the Mood of the Nation, thank you all very much for joining us. You can, of course, read much more in the latest issue of India Today, the Mood of the Nation 2022. At the end of the day, Janta Janardhan. They will decide who, in a way, comes to power. Thanks for watching. Stay well, stay safe. Bye for now.